I'm Gene, and this is Perfect Flow. I'm a New Zealand-based athlete and coach focused on optimizing performance, health, and well-being. While I have a professional background in biomedical engineering, I've chosen to follow my more immediate passions for running, endurance, adventure, movement, nutrition, lifestyle, community, psychology, and personal growth. My goal in starting this podcast is to connect with bright minds to extract the information I need to live a life that makes sense and feels good, and share those conversations with others. Apart from your favorite podcast app, the best places to follow my work are perfectflow.nz, genebeveridge.nz, and Perfect Flow on Facebook. Hi, and welcome back to Perfect Flow. So many of you will know I moved to Wellington recently, and it's been an absolute blast. Not only is the training that I want to do for trail running really convenient down here, but also the community is mad keen on adventure running. Sometimes just mad, I think. And after running with a number of these guys, I thought I should definitely get some of them on just to hear about their enthusiasm for long trail runs and the kind of things that they get up to in the Wellington region. So today I'm speaking with Tim Sutton. He's a very fit runner down here in Wellington and is very keen on some of these longer adventure runs and also some longer multi-sport stuff. We talk a lot about SKs. If you're not sure what an SK is, you will definitely know what that is by the end of this episode. And I actually took my first trip to the Tararuas on the weekend, and we did the Jumbo Holdsworth Loop, which is a really popular loop down here in Wellington, and there's also a race on that loop that you may have heard of. And it was great, but we got to experience the rough side of the Tararuas also, that is the wind. And on one day it was super windy, and the other day was just blissfully calm. And so that was a great experience that I had just after recording this episode with Tim. Late last week was when we recorded, so I really appreciate the points he's making about the weather in the Tararuas and why it makes many of these runs like the SK so challenging, and because they're so challenging they're also so highly revered. So yeah, I speak to Tim about these SKs and the good and bad experiences that come from trying some of these longer adventure runs. And we also talk a little bit about adventure navigation, which is something I'm always happy to get into. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Tim Sutton. Tim, thanks for coming on Perfect Flow. It's nice to meet you, and hopefully I get to know you a little bit better over the next wee while. This is the first time that it's been... Actually, no, I have done one where I haven't met the person at all, but one of the first. It's pretty unusual to meet someone for the first time, but yeah, I've just been seeing a lot of your adventures, mainly through social media, and I thought, man, I've got to say hi to this guy, because there's a lot of action going down here in Wellington. So I'm relatively new to Wellington, and there's a lot of action that unfortunately hasn't been the most social year or 2 years, has it? So yeah, tell me, what brought you to Wellington? How long have you been here?
So I grew up in Wellington. I was born here and spent my childhood here, mainly around the eastern suburbs. Grew up sailing rather than running. I came to running later on, and went away to Palmy and over to Australia for a little bit, but have always been drawn back to Wellington, mainly because of the sea and the hills, and we're not far from adventure.
Yeah, it is amazing how close it is to all sorts of activities, and it's not just running, but I've been so impressed with the mountain biking. You see people just riding off to some pretty cool and pretty hard trails, but just from downtown.
Yeah, you can get quite a lot into a commute on your way to work or on your way home. Now we've got an amazing trail system, and it's only getting better. I think I'm still discovering trails, even though I've been out on them for the last couple of decades. My background before running was actually multi-sport, so I did a lot of mountain biking, and that kind of got me into the trail running, and then into the bigger hills.
Yeah, cool. Do you know what an SK is?
An SK.
Yeah.
I've heard of
What is an
it.
SK? What is an SK for those who are new to this?
So in SK, S stands for Scormans, and the K stands for Kaitoki. And now it's basically it's sort of written into the folklore of mountain running history in New Zealand. But until I think it was back in 2014, I hadn't really heard of it, and most people wouldn't have heard of it. And basically, it's a traverse from what used to be Scorman's Hut, way up the north end of the Tararua mountain range, near the Eketahuna, where the Mangatinoka River comes out. And
And that's a solid like hour and a half drive from Wellington.
yeah, two and a bit hours drive. So when you're driving from Wellington, you're sort of looking over your left-hand shoulder, and the whole way up, you're looking at this big mountain range, and you don't actually see the parts that you're going to be running on because they're further in. And so it's there's three routes, main routes. The foremost being the main range, which basically follows the spine of the Tararua Range from Putara all the way down to Kaitoki, where it comes out in the hut. And it's a little under 80k, but there's a good deal of hills in between.
Yeah, and some rough sections as well. If I've seen some of the routes. I haven't done it, but I've seen some of the routes, and there's some bits where you're just on the ridgeline and it's just a route.
It's pretty gnarly, yeah. So the northern section is all untracked. So you've got probably about an hour's run into Hirapai Hut, which is the first hut on the route, and then there's a bit of a track up onto the tops from Hirapai Hut, and then for the next, say, 10k, it's all untracked tops. There's a footpad from people going through there, but you're pretty much doing all of your own navigation. If it's clagged in, then it's definitely a challenge. It adds to the challenge. And then once you get onto the track, it's still I've heard it talked about in Te Araroa through walkers conversations, and the Tararua and usually comes out top as one of the gnarliest parts of the length of New Zealand walk.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what fascinates me about this SK phenomenon is just how organically it's kind of emerged from the folklore into like something that's quite central to at least the ultra and adventure running stuff in New Zealand without anyone to guide it there. Is that your understanding of it?
Initially, there was no real guidance. There's been an SK book that has gathered stories of tramping the SK, and it wasn't until 1995, I think, when Colin Rolfe, whose name a lot of people will recognise, set off from Putara with, I think he had sausages, beans and porridge and a couple of bananas for breakfast, and set off with some mates from Putara and emerged in Kaitoki with different support along the way. 22 hours 50 something. It was the first time it had been done in under 24 hours, and basically showed that it could be done. And so since then, there was actually a big gap between Colin Rolfe doing it and anyone else having an attempt at running it. We had Gary Goldsworthy, who actually came before him, who I've had a few online discussions with Gary, and he came in 25 hours 30, I believe, and he didn't run a step. So he said if it had occurred to him to run it, he probably would have run, but he was a tramper. And so then once Colin had done it, there was a big gap, and then a couple, Lawrence Pidcock and Chris Swallow, decided that it needed to be resurrected as a run, and so with a bit of support they managed to tick it off in under 24 hours. And since then Chris put a lot of effort into trying to create a bit of a groundswell behind it. So he started a 24-hour club, and fairly unofficial to begin with, but since then with another Chris Martin, who's a bit of a godfather of local adventure running, through his energies and Chris Swallow's energies, this club was initiated with certificates given to anyone that could break the 24-hour limit on the main range.
Cool. I see. So yeah, there are some kind of more standardized recognition coming into the play now. Is there even some story going back further that I think this is probably more the trampers, would try to leave work as soon as possible on Friday and get back before Monday? I've heard this rumor. Can you?
That's right. I think it was back in the early 60s the route was first postulated as a challenge, and there were I'm sorry, my memory for the names isn't that good, but there was a bit of a race between trampers to, exactly as you said, catch the train out and then a taxi to the Putara Road end, and a wander up to the Hirabai hut. And
where do they catch the train to?
Ekatahuna, I believe. And then it's probably about an hour's drive from Ekatahuna out into the sticks, and then turn up. I think a lot of the trampers were probably public servants, and so they'd turn up at their desk jobs on a Monday, bleary-eyed, but having traversed the length of a range.
Yeah, I can imagine the excitement for the colleagues on Monday morning, wondering whether they've made it back or not, and how much sleep was taken, and what shape they're going to be on. Such laughs. Yeah, so the running scene at the moment, it just comes up all the time whenever there's a social run. Yeah, so and so is going to do an SK next month, or so and so attempted it and had to bail. So it's really built itself this kind of prestige and recognition. And yeah, it's interesting what kind of these fastest known times, I guess, do that. I guess it's close enough to town that enough people have attempted it, and it's really got quite a following now.
Yeah. Like there's numerous attempts every year now. I think back when I first did it was 2015. I first did the main range, and at that stage, as a run, you had Colin Rolfe, you had Chris and Lawrence, and then Grant Guys and Matt Bixley went as a team. And nobody else had done it, so there wasn't a lot of information as far as splits, as far as the way that you approach something like that as a run. And so it was actually quite fun doing the research, because you had to really dig deep on the interwebs to get the sort of information that took a bit of the edge off the fear of going into something that was pretty unknown at the time. And then since then, I think the 2015, there were quite a few successes the following summer, and that's the successes were largely due to the fact that it was the local mountain running community who had caught on to this, and they'd all spent quite a bit of time in the Tararua, and so they'd ticked off a lot of the unknowns. And now since then, there's I don't know what the numbers are, but there's quite a few attempts every year, and the successful attempts to unsuccessful attempts are getting closer to 50-50 as people try it, which is really cool. And people quite often will go back having had an unsuccessful attempt the first time, and to take it on and come out successful.
Yeah, it is pretty hairy up on those ranges. It's also one of the windier parts of the country, so I imagine it's pretty unlivable when the conditions get really bad on those exposed tops.
Yeah, it can be brutal. One of the big things with an SK is the bailout options are fairly minimal, and the ones that do exist, you've still got a 6 or so hour run out if you want to get off the tops. So it's a very committing route. I think the Tararua Range, I think the number is has 80 fine days a year where it's not blowing a gale, and so quite often it's not a case of picking a day and saying this is when I'll do it and then do your training and taper to a day. You're basically watching the forecasts, watching the long-term forecasts, and saying, "Oh, that looks like it could be a goer," and then making things work out so that you can go with the good weather. Because as you say, when the weather rolls in, the tops are a place you don't want to be.
Have you had any hairy experiences in the Tararuas?
Yeah, I've had a couple. I guess I had a go at doing the 1500s, which there's a bunch of 1500 meter peaks in the range, and on my second attempt, I'd picked a weather window. I'd been watching for that big high. The general rule of thumb is to wait for a southerly to roll on through, and then jump in on the high that follows through after it, because you've usually got maybe a 24-hour window before the gale force northerlies kick back in. And so I'd seen one of these southerly systems come through. I went up to Putara, and it was still howling through the eaves of the back little schoolhouse that you can stay in up there. Right, so I think I was at the Putara base camp, which was an old schoolhouse. It was at the time it was owned by Tawa College, and I believe that some local farmers now operate it as a lodge that you can hire out. And anyway, the wind was whistling through the eaves all night. Knew that this good weather was meant to be rolling through, but I'd set myself, I think it was a midnight start, or possibly a 1 o'clock start. Anyway, started out from Putara, and you could really hear the wind up high, and it's always very funny going into that track, knowing that you've got this whole mountain range ahead of you. you very quickly find yourself feeling pretty isolated, especially in the dark. Dawn's another thing. But anyway, I arrived up at Hirapai Hut, which is basically on the spur that delivers you up onto the tops. And I'm outside listening to this wind, filling my bottles for the next however many hours. And all of a sudden the door opens here at my hut. This must be 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and somebody figure wanders out into the dark, and then another figure wanders out into the dark, and then there's a whole lot of people around me, and it was actually a bunch of the Wellington runners who were planning SKs for the next morning, and they'd had a couple of them, Mark and Marta, had headed up onto the main range and turned around at Hirapai because it was too heinous, rain coming in sideways. And anyway, I sort of thought, well, I'm here now, so may as well push on until it's no fun anymore. And the moment I got above the tree line, I was into all of my storm gear. The rain was coming in sideways and ice cold. And every time you got onto an exposed bit of ridge, you're basically holding onto scrub, leatherwood and tussock to hold you onto the hillside. And because this section's all totally untracked, it's pretty slow going at night in those sort of conditions, because you really need to make sure that you've got the nav right. There's lots of false spurs that want to lead you out, and so I ended up getting up to the top of East Peak, which is probably the top of the first big climb, and there's a big dip down between East Peak and West Peak into sort of a leatherwood riddled saddle, but it's not a direct dip. There's quite a few dog legs, and so in the gale force winds and the rain and all that sort of thing, I'd been through there a number of times, and so I should have been more on top of the navigation, but I knew that there was a dog leg at first, so I pushed on a little bit too far past where I should have dropped down into the saddle, and all of a sudden I found myself in really steep country, off trail, in dense leatherwood, with the rain pouring down. Must have been about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was also sick because I had a bug that I'd convinced myself I'd gotten over, and so rather than back pedaling and taking myself to a known point, I decided, okay, the ridge is across that way, I reckon I can bash my way there. And if you've ever been in Tararua Leatherwood, you know that this was probably not the sanest of decisions, and so I spent probably a good half an hour, 3/4 of an hour bashing my way through leatherwood, getting into steeper and steeper country, only half sure that the ridge was off to my left where I was heading.
Did you feel like you had been you'd been just losing so much, you'd been losing every battle at that stage, that you had to take a risk to catch back up to where you... Well, is that like the crazy logic that's going on at that point?
Yeah, I think the logic is going backwards is time, whereas actually going backwards probably would have saved me a lot of time. But once you actually get into the leatherwood and you commit yourself, going backwards becomes pretty much as hard as going forwards. So anyway, eventually I regained the ridge and battled through the rest of the night, and with dawn along Dundas Ridge came the good weather. And it's actually amazing wearing all of your storm gear, wearing your synthetic puffer and having that sunlight all of a sudden start to dry things out, and you start steaming, and all of a sudden the world doesn't look like such a bad place. Yeah, Yeah, and so that was one hairy moment, I guess. On the Tarn SK, so you've got the main range, but then you've got the Tarn, which is probably, to my mind, my favourite of the three SKs: the main range, the Tarn, and the valleys. The Tarn, whereas the main range basically follows tracks pretty much as soon as you hit Pukematawai and the Tararua trails. The Tarn SK follows the eastern tops, and this section basically all the way from Putara until you hit Jumbo Peak, sort of half the way down the range, is totally untracked, and it's got some amazing clambery sections, some fairly exposed little clambers. And so to me it feels like much more of a big mountain mission, and you're a lot more reliant on your own navigation rather than following trail markers. And so I was actually, no, I think this was probably on my first attempt at the 1500s, which follows the same route down the eastern range, because that's where most of the 1500 metre peaks are. And I ended up perfect visibility, so it was one of the hottest days of summer, and I ended up on one of the 1500 metre peaks, which is called North King. You've got North King, Middle King, South King, and climbing up North King from the north, heading down the range, is pretty sedate. It's just a good wander up a hill, and then you get to the southern side. As with a lot of the peaks in the Tararua Range, the southern side has been hit by all the storms. All the freeze thaw goes on the south sides, and so they're a lot more gnarly. And so I was following what I thought was the footpad. There's a footpad pretty much all the way down, even the untracked tops. And
there's just enough traffic. I guess there's some hunters in there as well.
Yeah, and a lot of trampers will go out that side as well. You've got a few bivvies along that way emergency bivvies that you can use. But after Tarn Ridge Hut, there's no reliable hut water, so you're basically collecting water from tarns and treating it. And so I was following off Mid King. It gets quite steep on the south side, as I was saying, and I was following what I thought was the footpad. And the other thing with these peaks getting a lot of weather is they get a lot of runoff, and so what I thought was the footpad was actually probably just where water had run off fairly regularly. And so I started following that down. I guess I probably just wasn't concentrating as much as I should have been. I'd been going for probably a good 12 hours or so, and the further I went down, the steeper it got, and it started getting more and more exposed. And I got to a point where it's like, well, it kind of looks like there might be a little bit of a footpad down there, but it's a 2 metre jump.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah, and again, in hindsight, and I guess probably a little bit of an experience, I should have turned around and had another go at it. But instead of turning around, I decided, okay, well, I'll just jump down to that ledge. And so I jumped down to this ledge, and it's a good 2 metre drop, and no real holds to get back up. So in jumping down to this ledge, I'd kind of committed myself to going further, and ended up getting to the point where there was really nowhere else to stand, and you could see the ridge off to the left, the main ridge, and I could tell that I was definitely not in the right spot. And
that moment of realization,
yeah,
it's just like, it's all too obvious. You can't keep telling yourself your own story any longer.
No, there's the ridge, and that's where I want to be, and I'm not there. And so I'd kind of committed myself to going this way. There was no real way of climbing back up, and so the only way to get across was this really sketchy looking scree face. Not the sort of scree that you'd like to run down, because it basically got steeper and steeper the further it went down below me, till it got vertical. And so it was probably only about 4 meters of this scree face, but it was just steep enough that it wanted to move with you. And so I ended up starfishing myself against the scree face to get more friction. Basically spread my weight as much as I could, and I don't know, it must have looked like a starfish trying to suck my way across the ocean floor, but basically slowly maneuver my way across the scree face, and the relief when I reached up and grabbed solid rock on the way back up to that ridge was immense. And since then I haven't really got myself into that sort of situation. I think it was a good learning experience. You can be told so many times, but when you do something wrong, it's good way of learning. As long as you come out the other end.
Yeah, do you take a PLB with you?
Yep. Pretty early on, we bought a family PLB when we realised that this was a thing that I was into. So I've always had a PLB. I think that it's a no-brainer now, because it takes the search out of search and rescue. And saying that, I think that it's some people will make a bad decision on the weather just because they've got a PLB. So in my mind, having that PLB, it's basically worst case scenario. So I'm not going to go out on a bad weather forecast just because I've got this emergency button in my bag.
Yeah, I imagine if you're seriously in the middle of nowhere and there's really strong winds, they're not going to be able to pick you up fast if you hurt yourself and can't get yourself out.
No, a lot of the time, and I think recently there was a tramper in the last couple of weeks, I think it was, that got into trouble basically over on part of that eastern range. Went in with a bad forecast and got into trouble, lost the track and set off the PLB, but it was a good 12 hours before the search and rescue team could get in there to help him, and it could be longer with the Tararua. Like sometimes the wind closes in for days. So a lot of the time with the planning, it's also looking at the 12 or 24 hours after you expect to be out as well. Because if something goes wrong, which when you're running, there's much more likelihood of rolling an ankle or things coming unstuck. You want to give yourself a bit of a buffer with the weather.
It's been really interesting to me to follow the inclusion of navigation into these endurance and fastest known times. Of course, I come from the orienteering background, so I love the navigation aspects, and I've been really excited watching these two worlds collide because as people seek a tougher and tougher challenge, you inevitably end up going off trail. And so a lot of the people who I'm running with around Wellington at the moment are all surprisingly skilled with the navigation. So maybe not doing the kind of precise, finicky orienteering navigation, but just the average competency of people who want to do long runs. The average competency of their navigation always exceeds my expectations. So are you doing a bit with a topo map whenever you get the chance?
Yeah, I'm actually in the middle of planning an after-work Rogaine at the moment. I think going into
Cool. Is that one of these Hutt Valley orienteering
that's right.
ones? Oh, that's so cool. Nice.
An eastern suburbs or Miramar South Coast one. It's I think going into getting into the hills got me more interested in the navigation. I started off with a GPS back before phones had GPS software on them, but I've never been that reliant on phones either. Like technology can fail you, and so a map and compass has always been that fallback. So early on, I figured that you really want to have at least some basic map and compass skills to begin with, and then you spend a bit of time off trail and you start to get a feel for the land and noticing features and all that sort of thing. And I guess I've always been attracted to the challenge of something new. I think that's for me, that's what the SK was. I'd only ever done local trail and mountain races, fairly short distance in comparison. I think my longest run would have been the Tararua mountain race, which takes you up and over the Southern Crossing, and that was about 5 hours. And so it was basically needing to learn a lot more about the range, and then the skills that come with that. And having done the SKs and a few other bits and pieces in there, it's attracted me more into the off-trail stuff and getting down into the rivers and following untracked spurs and all that sort of thing. And the more you do, the more experience you get, the more you get a feel for reading country, and the more you want to learn.
Yeah, that's cool. There are baby steps with adventure navigation. Just bit by bit, going a little bit further off the trail for longer and longer distances. Where's your favorite place for doing kind of off-trail topo map navigation?
Off-trail stuff. I think the closest to here is probably the Rumataka. Rumataka Range. I think it's said to be the youngest range in New Zealand, and so it's also falling down the quickest. There's a lot of exposed crumbly greywacke in there, some gnarly streams, nice bouldery streams, waterfalls, and plenty of stuff to go and find. And a lot of the bush is very dense, and so you've got to have a compass out the whole time if you're following ridge lines and spurs. Lots of spurs to try and fool you off the ridge line. And so yeah, it's a 50-minute drive from Wellington. There's also the Eastbourne Hills. Once you get out past the trails, you get up. If you're heading up Gollan Stream, there's a whole lot of spurs and stuff that you can go and play on in there. But yeah, I do like the challenge of bush navigation. It adds a whole other dimension when you can't see far ahead of you. You've got to be real, pay attention to the subtleties of curves and slopes.
Did you do God Zone this year?
No, I've never done a God Zone. More out of the financial commitment than anything else, and the fact that I've got a young family. No, it's definitely on my list further on down the track. But
yeah, they threw in some quite cool topo navigation this year, just a little mini Rogaine. So yeah, hopefully that's a sign of things to come as well. Then I think people with a kind of skill set like yours become suddenly really valuable when you've got to do just a few control points in native forest at nighttime.
Yeah. I think the really cool thing about the after work Rogaines in Wellington now is they're huge. The amount of people turning up to them is getting bigger every time, and from experienced navigators to people just wanting to get a taste for it, and it's very welcoming. I think I'd only been doing Rogaines for a year when I was asked to plan one, and so it's cool because the people doing them put back into the community, and you actually realise when you start planning one how much work goes into it, and so it opens your eyes to what the people before you have done.
Yeah, we noticed the same thing in Auckland, just the explosion of these kind of low barrier to entry Rogaines. A lot of the time in Auckland we're using the maps we would use for orienteering, but just using them again as a Rogaine. So it's exactly the same map, but it does bring a different crowd, and you get all these people who maybe find orienteering a bit alien or just a bit different, but then they come from Rogaining and they bring the family, bring the dogs, and it's so good for getting people just into some navigation and exposing them to that challenge. So I think we're seeing the growth there just all over New Zealand. So bring it on. It's so fun to see 250 people just all get together after work and just go nuts. The locals must be real surprised about what on earth is
all the
going
torches
on.
bobbing around, especially the nighttime ones. I think it's cool in that it's kind of bringing back what was a bit of a dying art as well, with map reading and compass stuff. Like as you say, there was a small, reasonably small orienteering community that's been going strong for forever, but just bringing that navigation, the map and compass navigation, back into the mainstream as well, because
the orienteering community tends to end up being a little bit insular and maybe a bit culty for some people. But
cults are good. The good
ones. No, we love it, but it's if there's a way to bridge those two worlds and get more people involved, especially as Rogaining just lends itself to being so social, because everyone starts together and finishes together, and you can all have a moan together at the finish about what you did wrong. So what other adventures do you have planned for the next wee while?
At the moment I'm not sure. Just earlier on this year, I had probably one of the bigger adventures that I've taken on with a friend of mine, Greg Clark. We had a go at doing the 4 peaks. So the basic idea was to in winter summit the 3 Central Plateau volcanoes as a traverse from Tararua to Mangatapopo. And so we saw a big weather window. It actually turned out to be one of the most intense highs that they'd had in years, which was great during the day, not a breath of wind. And so there was 15 hours ticking those peaks off, and then the next part of the challenge was to ride our way across to Taranaki via the Forgotten World Highway, which is the name for good reason. We discovered. I think I'd driven through there years beforehand with my old man, but you don't really pay too much attention when you're in a car. But the downside to this giant big high was the bitterly cold night that it brought down on us. So we got going on the bikes about 9 o'clock at night. The idea was to basically do it all as a single push. And so I think we'd started maybe 6:30 in the morning doing the mountains. Got onto the bike at 9 o'clock at night, and then it's a little over 250 something K of very undulating country, and it was all in a wetting mist, a freezing wetting mist. I think it was -4 degrees when we left Mangatapopo, and creating your own wind brought that wind chill down even further. And so we had black ice all the way through the night, on and off on all the corners. I only dropped my bike once, but it was pretty hairy on the downhills.
Yeah, just to feel that slight slip of the front wheel.
Yeah.
Just when you go over a little bit of ice. Oh.
When you're going 40-something k an hour, and yeah, puckering. And so that was it was like going into a twilight land. It was basically all the way through the night. You couldn't see more than a couple of 100 meters ahead of you because of this fog. Everything was wet. Everything was cold, and we arrived. We got dawn just after Whangamomana. My old man had parked up in his car. He did him and a friend, Mark Harefield, had basically helped us with the bikes, meeting us at Mangatapopo, and Dad had driven through the Lost Highway and had a nap at Whangamomana, and so we filled up with warm food there, and struck dawn just after Whangamomana, climbed up out of there, and eventually saw Taranaki peek over one of these farm hills on the other side of the hills, and we got into Stratford around about 10 o'clock. So we'd been going for well over 24 hours at that stage, and through the night we'd started hallucinating. I saw an old Māori kuia at the top of one of these big climbs out of Whangamomana, just standing off the side of the road in the bush looking down at me. Really spooky, and got up closer and it was just a dead panga. I think that Greg saw a whole lot of rabbits all over the road, and it turned out that dead rabbits, and it turned out all the dead rabbits were just potholes. And I think we saw a road crew at about 2 o'clock in the morning waving us through in the middle of nowhere. It was a couple of cones at the side of the road. And so we got to, I think it must have been about 10:30 when we got to Stratford, and we still had a big ride up to the road end, the ski field on the eastern side or northeastern side of Mount Taranaki, and we figured this was probably still another couple of hours, and it was a really hard call because we'd come so far, but we did the maths and worked out that we'd probably end up coming down the mountain in the dark, and Taranaki's fairly notorious for the weather closing in and everything freezing on dark, and in the state that we were in, we decided that we were probably going to be a liability to ourselves, being up doing fairly technical climbing on the mountain. And so we made the call to basically turn it into a mountains to sea, and carried on out to the New Plymouth coast and dipped the feet in the ocean, having come from the middle of the country out to the sea. So it was pretty rewarding, but it also feels like there's a bit of unfinished business there too.
Yeah. What's your mental state like emotional state, positive or negative, when you have pushed that hard? The intensity is low, but you've got yourself into quite a state by the time you're hallucinating. What's the kind of internal morale like at that stage?
Usually pretty good. Like there's definitely dark patches that you go through. I think that just the complete draining of energy and the lack of sleep sort of lets you go to dark places. But I'm generally pretty positive on these missions, and the good thing when you go with a team is with Greg. You both know that you work really well together. He's a really positive fella, and so you can see when your partner's going through one of those moments, and so you can build them up, and vice versa. But I think most of the time it's pretty easy to remind yourself that you're doing something that you set out wanting to do, and you're really lucky to be doing it. Like to be able to do these things in the wilderness that we've got here is pretty amazing. So it's pretty easy to find the silver linings even of those darker parts of the adventures.
Yeah, I think that definitely fits my experience of the times when I've had the worst emotional time has been very inward focused, and it just tends to be a lot of more disappointment about not meeting kind of performance expectations or something like that. And yeah, the times when for whatever reason it's been more outward focused, there's just so much to enjoy on a lot of these missions or races. Yeah, I've definitely noticed that can sway just whether I'm having a good time or a bad time. But I've never pushed anything as long as you have, like nowhere close to as far as you guys have pushed it. So yeah, I still wonder. I'm still keen to maybe do a God Zone at some stage, just to give it a push. But that will be interesting to see, yeah, what that state is like, and whether it's just like, oh, I'm so tired, this is hilarious, or whether like you're actually suffering at an emotional level. Yeah, yet to be seen for me.
Absolutely, and I think until you take yourself there, you don't know how it's gonna play out. But I think we're pretty resilient, as humans, and so even when you start plumbing those depths, it's you can find tricks of getting yourself out of them. And it's basically for me it's just giving yourself that next thing to work towards, maybe a little treat or something like that along the way. It's just little things.
Cool. Well, I'm off to the kind of Featherston. We might go camp at Jumbo Holdsworth on the weekend. That campsite near there, and I will spare a thought for all those who have attempted and either failed or succeeded to take on an SK or any similar mission in our wonderful hills. So thanks a lot, Tim, for sharing those stories of your adventures. I'm sure a lot of people find it really interesting and motivating. There's a lot of people moving into the scene, and a lot of people always keen to do a personal best. So yeah, it's great to hear from someone who's out there leading the pack and getting everyone hyped.
Awesome, man. I've enjoyed the chat. It's not often I get to talk about it.
Yeah, cool. And I hope one day we can meet in person sometime soon.
Yeah, let's go running.
Yeah, let's do it. Cool. Thanks, Tim. If you're enjoying the Perfect Flow podcast and want more value from it in the future, there are some ways you can support it. The first is to rate or leave a positive review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or other platforms where it's available. The second is to share this podcast or specific episodes on social media or with friends. The third is to get involved more directly through the Perfect Flow page on Facebook, where I'm trying to construct a more interactive community. I want Perfect Flow to belong to the listeners, and if you tell me what topics you're most interested in, or even suggest specific guests, I'll do my best to make it happen. This is your opportunity to be part of something that answers your questions and adds value to your life. Another good reason to follow Perfect Flow on Facebook is that I post links to episodes, blog posts, and anything I find useful to this page. It's a great way to follow my training, racing, and learning. Another great way to stay engaged is to subscribe to genebeveridge.nz. This way you will get podcasts and blogs emailed to you, avoiding the clutter of Facebook. I don't know where this project will take us, but the reception so far has been positive. Who knows where we might be in a few years.